The testing ground. The transport ship, Unity's Promise, descended through Nexara's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull gleaming against the planet's strange lavender sky. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face to the viewport and watched as the surface revealed itself in breathtaking detail. Massive crystal formations jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, creating a maze of glittering towers that stretched beyond the horizon. Each crystal caught the light of Nexara's twin suns and threw it back in spectacular rainbows that danced across the landscape. Elena had studied the preliminary scans for months, but seeing the crystal maze with her own eyes made her breath catch in her throat. The formations weren't random. They followed patterns that seemed almost musical, rising and falling in rhythmic waves that suggested purpose rather than chance. As a xenogeologist specializing in planetary acoustics, she recognized something that the other expedition members had missed. These crystals weren't just beautiful, they were instruments. Commander Thek of the Zephyrian High Command stood beside her at the viewport, his forearms crossed in a gesture that Elena had learned meant either deep thought or growing impatience. His exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian, and his compound eyes reflected the crystal light in thousands of tiny fragments. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their military precision and technological superiority. They had conquered a dozen worlds through sheer tactical brilliance and overwhelming firepower. The energy readings are strongest at the center of the formation, Thek said, his voice carrying the clicking undertones that marked his species. Our scouts estimate a 3-day journey through the maze to reach the source. With our advanced equipment, we should complete the mission in half that time. Elena nodded but kept her doubts to herself. The Galactic Council had assembled this team because conventional exploration methods had failed on Nexara. 3 previous expeditions had entered the crystal maze, and none had returned. The energy signature at the maze's heart suggested technology far beyond anything the known species had developed. If they could unlock its secrets, it might revolutionize interstellar travel and energy production. Scholar Mirren glided up to join them, her translucent form rippling like water made solid. The Kellians were an aquatic species known for their wisdom and ancient knowledge. They had been exploring space when most other species were still learning to make fire. Myron's tentacles swayed gently as she moved, and her large eyes held depths that seemed to contain oceans of experience. The crystal formations trouble me, Mirren said, her voice like waves lapping against a shore. They resonate with frequencies that my people recognize from our oldest legends. Stories speak of worlds that sing to test the worthy and silence the unworthy forever. Warrior Grax snorted dismissively from across the transport's cabin. The Torvin stood nearly 8 feet tall, his rocky hide scarred from countless battles across the Outer Rim territories. His species believed that strength and determination could overcome any obstacle. They had carved their empire from asteroid belts and hostile moons through sheer willpower and physical prowess. Legends and stories, Grax rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. The previous expeditions failed because they were weak. We have superior weapons, better armor, and the combined strength of 4 species. Whatever killed them will find us much harder prey. Elena listened to her teammates argue and felt the familiar weight of being underestimated. Humans were the newest species to join the Galactic Council, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. To the other species, humans seemed primitive and fragile. They lacked the Zephyrians' advanced technology, the Kellians' ancient wisdom, or the Torvins' incredible physical strength. What humans possessed was adaptability, curiosity, and a talent for finding unexpected solutions to impossible problems. The transport touched down at the edge of the crystal maze with barely a tremor. The pilot, a nervous Kellian named Jorik, would remain with the ship while the 4-member team explored the maze on foot. Elena gathered her equipment, checking each piece carefully. Unlike her teammates, she traveled light. A portable spectrometer for analyzing crystal compositions, a sonic mapping device that could measure sound reflection and absorption, and a collection of simple tools that most species would consider primitive. The airlock cycled, and they stepped onto Nexara's surface. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth standard, making Elena feel almost weightless. The air was breathable for all 4 species, though it carried a strange quality that made every sound seem muffled and distant. Elena immediately noticed something her companions missed. The subtle vibration in the ground beneath their feet suggested that the entire crystal formation was resonating at frequencies just below the threshold of hearing. Thek activated his scanner array, a collection of sophisticated devices that could analyze everything from molecular composition to quantum energy states. The machines hummed and clicked as they processed information, displaying holographic readouts that floated in the air around him. Grax hefted his massive warhammer, its head carved from a single piece of neutronium and capable of shattering mountains. Mirren extended her sensory tentacles, using her species' natural ability to detect electromagnetic fields and energy patterns. Elena knelt and pressed her palm against the ground. The vibration was stronger here, a deep thrumming that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She pulled out her sonic mapping device and took initial readings. The crystals were definitely resonating, but the patterns were complex beyond anything she had encountered before. It was as if the entire maze was a massive instrument waiting for someone to play the right notes. "The entrance is this way," Thek announced, pointing toward a gap between two towering crystal spires. "My scanners detect a clear path for the first kilometer, then the formations become too dense to penetrate from this distance." They approached the entrance together, each species bringing their own perspective to the challenge ahead. The crystal spires rose hundreds of feet into the air, their surfaces smooth as glass and cold to the touch. Elena ran her fingers along the nearest crystal and felt a faint vibration that seemed to respond to her presence. When she hummed a low note, the crystal pulsed with soft light. "Fascinating," she murmured, pulling out her spectrometer. "The crystals aren't just conducting sound, they're amplifying and modifying it. Each formation has a different resonant frequency." Mirren's tentacles curled with interest. In the old stories, worlds like this were said to test visitors through harmony and discord. Those who could find the proper frequencies were granted passage. Those who created discord were what? Elena asked when the Kellian scholar fell silent. "Were absorbed into the crystal itself, becoming part of the maze's eternal song." Grax snorted again. "More stories. Look, the path is clear and wide enough for us to advance in formation. We maintain communication, watch for threats, and push forward until we reach the center. Simple and effective." Thek's scanners suddenly erupted in a cascade of warning signals. The commander's compound eyes widened as he processed the information. "Energy surge detected throughout the maze. Something has activated in response to our presence." A low harmonic tone began to emanate from the crystals around them. It started as barely audible whisper but quickly grew in volume and complexity. Elena recognized it immediately as a fundamental frequency, the base note from which all other harmonies would be built. Her teammates looked around nervously as the sound washed over them. "It's beautiful," Mirren said, her voice filled with wonder. "Like the songs my people sing to guide ships through the deep currents." "It's a warning," Grax countered, gripping his hammer tighter. "The maze knows we're here." Elena was already working with her sonic mapping device, analyzing the harmonic patterns as they developed. The crystals weren't just making random noise, they were communicating, sending signals back and forth across the maze in a language of pure sound. As she listened, she began to detect underlying patterns that reminded her of mathematical sequences she had studied in her youth. "It's not a warning," she said quietly. "It's an invitation." The harmonic tone shifted, adding new layers of complexity. Some crystals hummed in perfect harmony while others created deliberate discord. The effect was mesmerizing and slightly unsettling, like listening to a conversation in a language just beyond comprehension. Thek's scanners registered another energy surge, this one much stronger. "Whatever's happening, it's accelerating. We need to move now before the situation becomes more dangerous." They entered the maze in formation, with Grax taking point and Thek monitoring their rear. Mirren floated in the center of the group, her tentacles spread wide to detect any changes in the electromagnetic field. Elena brought up the rear, constantly recording and analyzing the sounds around them. The first corridor was exactly as Thek's scanners had predicted, wide, straight, and seemingly safe. The crystal walls rose on either side like a glittering canyon, their surfaces reflecting the team's images in countless fragments. The harmonic tones followed them, growing stronger as they moved deeper into the maze. Elena noticed that her footsteps created different echoes depending on where she placed them. Some spots on the ground seemed to absorb sound completely, while others amplified it into cascading reverberations. She began to suspect that the path itself was part of the maze's acoustic design. "Commander," she called to Thek, "I'm detecting some unusual acoustic properties in this corridor. We might want to consider how we're moving through here." Thek's attention was focused on his scanner array. All readings normal, no immediate threats detected. We maintain current pace and formation. They had traveled perhaps half a kilometer when Mirren suddenly stopped, her tentacles coiling with alarm. Something has changed. The electromagnetic patterns are shifting into configurations I've never seen before. As if responding to her words, the harmonic tones around them suddenly shifted into a minor key. The beautiful melodies became ominous and threatening. Elena felt her skin prickle as the sound waves seemed to press against her from all directions. Grax raised his hammer, scanning the crystal walls for threats. I don't see anything. No movement, no energy weapons, no hostile forces. The threat isn't something we can fight, Elena said, her understanding of the situation crystallizing like the formations around them. The maze itself is the weapon, it's using sound as a tool. Before anyone could respond, the corridor ahead of them suddenly filled with a brilliant flash of light. When their vision cleared, the path had changed. Where before there had been a straight passage, now there were 3 branching corridors, each one humming with different harmonic frequencies. That's impossible, Thex said, his scanners working frantically to process the new information. Matter doesn't just rearrange itself like that. Elena was already moving toward the center corridor, her sonic mapping device extended. It's not rearranging matter, it's using acoustic holography to create the illusion of solid barriers. The crystals can project sound waves so precisely that they feel solid to the touch. She reached out toward what appeared to be a crystal wall between the corridors. Her hand passed through it as if it were made of air, though her eyes insisted it was solid stone. Incredible, Mirren breathed. The maze isn't just testing our ability to navigate, it's testing our ability to distinguish reality from illusion. The harmonic tones grew more complex, weaving patterns that seemed to tug at their thoughts and emotions. Elena found herself feeling alternately calm and anxious as different frequencies washed over her. She realized that the maze was using psychoacoustic effects to influence their mental states. Grax swung his hammer at one of the illusory walls, expecting it to shatter. Instead, the weapon passed through harmlessly, throwing him off balance. Trickery and deception, he growled. Give me an enemy I can fight properly. This is the fight, Elena said, studying the frequency patterns with growing fascination. The maze is challenging us to understand its language. Each corridor probably leads to a different test or challenge. Thex scanners finally managed to penetrate the acoustic illusions enough to provide basic readings. The left corridor shows high energy density but appears to be a dead end. The right corridor extends for several kilometers but shows signs of instability. The center corridor has moderate energy readings and seems to continue toward our target. Then we take the center path, Grax said immediately. The most direct route to our objective. Elena shook her head. It's not that simple. The maze is offering us choices, but it's also testing how we make decisions. Each corridor might represent a different approach to problem solving. As if to emphasize her point, the harmonic tones shifted again. This time, each corridor began to sing with its own distinct melody. The left corridor hummed with the aggressive martial rhythms that reminded Elena of Torvin war songs. The right corridor sang with complex technological harmonies that echoed Zephyrian engineering protocols. The center corridor resonated with flowing melodic patterns that could have been Kellyan meditation chants. It's trying to separate us, Mirren observed. Each corridor is designed to appeal to one of our species' instincts and preferences. Elena listened carefully to all 3 melodies, noting how they interacted with each other. Separately, each song was beautiful but incomplete. Together they formed a complex harmony that was greater than the sum of its parts. She began to understand what the maze was really testing. We're not supposed to choose, she said suddenly. We're supposed to harmonize. Before she could explain further, the maze made the decision for them. The acoustic illusions suddenly collapsed, revealing that all 3 corridors were actually parts of a single winding passage. The separate melodies merged into a unified song that filled the corridor with rich, complex harmonies. Elena smiled as she realized the maze's first lesson. Cooperation and understanding were more powerful than individual strength or knowledge. The 4 species each brought unique abilities to the team, but their true potential lay in working together. Well played, she whispered to the crystals around them. But we're just getting started. The corridor ahead split again, this time into 7 different paths. Each one sang with a different frequency, and Elena could see that the challenges ahead would be far more complex than simple illusions. The maze was testing them step by step, and each test would require them to grow beyond their individual limitations. As they prepared to face the next challenge, Elena felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. The maze was more than just a defense system or a test, it was a teacher, and it had much to show them about the power of harmony in a universe filled with discord. The real journey was just beginning. The maze awakens. The 7 corridors stretched before them like the strings of some cosmic instrument, each one vibrating with its own unique frequency. Elena stood at the junction, her sonic mapping device working frantically to analyze the complex acoustic patterns that filled the air around them. The harmonies were more sophisticated now, layered with mathematical precision that spoke of intelligence far beyond anything she had encountered. Commander Thek's scanner array painted holographic displays in the air, showing energy readings that fluctuated wildly with each change in the maze's song. His compound eyes reflected the dancing lights as he processed information that seemed to contradict itself with every passing second. The Zephyrian commander prided himself on logical analysis and predictable outcomes, but the maze was challenging every assumption he had ever made about how reality should function. Energy patterns are unstable, Thek reported, his clicking voice tight with frustration. Each corridor shows different threat levels, but the readings change every time the harmonics shift. My equipment cannot establish reliable baseline measurements. Warrior Grax hefted his neutronium warhammer, testing its weight against the strange gravity effects that seemed to pulse through the junction. The Torvan warrior had fought across dozens of worlds, facing enemies that ranged from energy beings to crystalline hive minds, but he had never encountered anything that felt quite like this. The maze didn't feel hostile in the traditional sense. It felt patient, as if it could wait forever for them to understand its purpose. 7 paths, Grax rumbled, his rocky hide scraping against itself as he moved. In Torvan tradition, 7 represents the sacred number of trials that must be overcome to prove worthiness. Perhaps we are meant to face each corridor in sequence. Scholar Mirren floated between her companions, her translucent form rippling with agitation. Her sensory tentacles were spread wide, detecting electromagnetic fluctuations that painted complex patterns in her consciousness. The Kellian scholar had lived for centuries and studied the acoustic traditions of dozens of species, but the maze's song contained elements that predated everything in her vast knowledge. The frequencies are not random, Mirren said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the crystal walls around them. They follow mathematical progressions that my people associate with consciousness testing protocols, ancient consciousness testing protocols. Elena listened to her teammates discuss strategy while her own mind raced through possibilities. Her human brain, evolved for pattern recognition and creative problem-solving, was beginning to detect underlying structures in the maze's seemingly chaotic behavior. The 7 corridors weren't just paths through the crystal formation. They were components of a larger instrument, and the maze was waiting for someone to play them correctly. She pulled out a simple tuning fork from her equipment pack, one of the primitive tools that her alien teammates often mocked. When she struck it against a crystal wall, the pure tone it produced caused an immediate reaction. 6 of the 7 corridors responded with complementary harmonies, while the 7th remained silent. Interesting, Elena murmured, making notes on her portable recorder. The maze is designed to respond to pure tones. It's looking for specific frequency relationships. Before she could explain further, the maze's song suddenly changed. The harmonies that had been beautiful and complex became discordant and aggressive. Warning tones pierced the air like sonic knives, and the crystal walls began to pulse with angry red light. Thek's scanners erupted in alarms. Massive energy buildup detected throughout the maze structure. Something has triggered a defensive response. The answer came from behind them. A new group had entered the maze. Elena turned to see 5 figures in advanced combat armor moving through the corridor they had just traversed. She recognized the distinctive energy signatures immediately. Vorlak raiders, one of the most aggressive species in the known galaxy. They had somehow followed the expedition to Nexara. The lead Vorlak raised a plasma rifle and fired at the crystal wall nearest to Elena's team. The energy bolt struck the crystal surface and was absorbed completely, but the maze's reaction was immediate and violent. The harmonic tones became a shrieking cacophony that made all 4 team members clutch their heads in pain. "Fools!" Mirren gasped, her tentacles coiling tightly against her body. "They're attacking the maze directly. They don't understand what they're dealing with." The Vorlak leader fired again, this time at one of the corridor entrances. The plasma bolt disappeared into what looked like solid crystal, but Elena could see that the maze was restructuring itself in response to the assault. New barriers were forming, cutting off escape routes and channeling all the occupants toward the deeper sections of the formation. "We have to move," Elena shouted over the growing din. "The maze is going into lockdown mode. If we don't find shelter soon, we'll be trapped in the open when it decides to actively defend itself." Grax needed no further encouragement. He charged toward the nearest corridor, his massive form moving with surprising speed despite the disorienting effects of the maze's sonic assault. Thek followed, his scanner array struggling to maintain coherent readings in the chaos. Myron flowed after them, her aquatic grace allowing her to navigate the increasingly unstable environment with fluid efficiency. Elena brought up the rear, pausing just long enough to record the frequency patterns that were emerging from the maze's defensive response. Even in crisis, her scientific mind couldn't help but marvel at the sophisticated acoustic engineering that surrounded them. The maze wasn't just defending itself randomly, it was using targeted frequency weapons designed to disrupt the nervous systems of different species. They plunged into the third corridor from the left, one that had been humming with warm, welcoming tones before the Vorlak attack triggered the maze's defenses. Now it resonated with frequencies that made Elena's teeth ache and her inner ear struggle to maintain balance. The crystal walls pressed closer together as they ran, forcing them into single file. Behind them, they could hear the Vorlak raiders shouting in their harsh, guttural language. More plasma fire erupted, followed by screams that cut through even the maze's sonic barrage. The raiders were learning too late that brute force was not an effective strategy against an opponent that could reshape reality through sound. The corridor suddenly opened into a vast chamber filled with crystal formations that defied logical explanation. Massive spires twisted through the air in impossible spirals, their surfaces reflecting light and sound in patterns that created three-dimensional holographic displays. Elena realized they had entered one of the maze's main processing centers, a space where the acoustic intelligence could focus its full attention on analyzing intruders. The chamber fell silent. The sudden absence of sound was more unsettling than the previous cacophony. Elena's ears rang in the vacuum of noise, and she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her chest. Her teammates looked around nervously, their various sensory organs struggling to adapt to the sensory deprivation. Then the chamber began to sing. It started with a single pure tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The crystal formations responded in harmony, each one adding its own voice to create a choir of impossible beauty. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes as the music washed over her, carrying emotions and concepts that transcended language. The song was telling a story. Images began to form in the air around them, created by the precise intersection of sound waves and light. Elena saw the history of the maze's builders, an ancient species that had transcended physical form to become beings of pure acoustic energy. They had built the crystal maze as a test and a gift, a way to evaluate other species and determine their readiness for advanced knowledge. The Vorlak raiders stumbled into the chamber behind them, their armor smoking and their weapons sparking with electromagnetic interference. The leader raised his plasma rifle toward Elena's team, but before he could fire, the chamber's song focused on him specifically. The Vorlak's nervous system, evolved for aggression and dominance, could not process the complex harmonic patterns that suddenly surrounded him. He collapsed, his rifle clattering across the crystal floor. His companions tried to help him, but they too were overwhelmed by frequencies designed to pacify violent intentions. Elena watched in fascination as the maze demonstrated its ability to neutralize threats without causing permanent harm. The Vorlak raiders weren't dead or seriously injured. They were simply unconscious, their aggressive impulses temporarily suppressed by acoustic manipulation of their brain chemistry. "Remarkable," Thek said, his scanner array finally able to function properly in the chamber's controlled environment. "The maze is using targeted psychoacoustic effects to modify behavior and emotional states. The technology required for such precise neural manipulation is beyond anything in our databases." Mirren's tentacles swayed in rhythm with the chamber's continuing song. "My people have legends of the singers, an ancient race that spoke reality into new shapes through pure sound. I believe them to be mythology, but this place suggests they were historical fact." Grax lowered his warhammer, his aggressive posture softening as the chamber's harmonies worked their subtle magic on his Torvan psychology. "I feel peaceful," he said, wonder creeping into his gravelly voice. "The rage that drives my people in battle has quieted. How is this possible?" Elena was studying the acoustic patterns with her sonic mapping device, her human brain working furiously to understand the underlying principles. It's using harmonic resonance to directly influence neurotransmitter production, she explained. Each species has slightly different brain chemistry, so the maze is generating personalized frequencies to produce specific emotional and psychological effects. The chamber's song shifted, and new images began to form around them. Elena saw the maze's purpose revealed in stunning detail. It was more than just a test. It was a sophisticated evaluation system designed to identify species that had the potential to join the singers in their transcendent existence. The criteria for success weren't based on technological advancement or military might. The maze was looking for qualities that Elena recognized as distinctly human: adaptability, creativity, the ability to find harmony in chaos and meaning in complexity, the willingness to cooperate across differences and solve problems through understanding rather than force. As the realization dawned on her, Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her teammates were remarkable individuals, but their species' cultural conditioning was limiting their ability to fully engage with the maze's challenges. The Zephyrians relied too heavily on technology. The Torvins defaulted to physical solutions. The Kellians were constrained by their reverence for ancient traditions. Humans, with their relatively short history and lack of specialized advantages, were paradoxically the most suited to the maze's requirements. They were generalists in a galaxy of specialists, capable of adapting to any situation and finding innovative solutions to unprecedented problems. The chamber's song reached a crescendo, and Elena felt a direct communication establish itself in her mind. The maze's intelligence spoke to her without words, conveying concepts and emotions through pure harmonic resonance. It was offering her a choice. She could lead her team deeper into the maze, toward challenges that would test the very foundations of their understanding. The path would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee that all of them would survive. But at the end lay knowledge that could transform the galaxy, elevating all sentient species to new levels of consciousness and capability. Or she could turn back now, leaving the maze to wait for another candidate more suited to its requirements. Elena looked at her teammates, seeing them with new clarity. Thek's technological brilliance, constrained by rigid thinking patterns. Grax's incredible strength, limited by cultural assumptions about conflict resolution. Myron's vast knowledge, filtered through species-specific perceptual frameworks. They were all remarkable beings, but they would need to transcend their limitations to succeed in the trials ahead. And Elena was beginning to understand that her role wasn't just to navigate the maze, it was to help her teammates discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed. She stepped forward, addressing the chamber's intelligence directly. "We accept your challenge," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of what she was committing to. "But we do it together, as a team. Whatever tests you have prepared, we'll face them as representatives of all our species, not just as individuals." The chamber's song swirled around her words, seeming to taste them for sincerity and resolve. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the harmonies shifted into a pattern that Elena interpreted as approval. New corridors opened in the chamber walls, leading deeper into the maze's heart. The acoustic patterns grew more complex, hinting at challenges that would push them far beyond their comfort zones. Elena gathered her equipment and checked on her teammates, making sure they were ready for whatever lay ahead. As they prepared to continue their journey, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by intelligences vast and ancient. The maze wasn't just testing them, it was teaching them, preparing them for responsibilities they couldn't yet imagine. The real trials were about to begin, and humanity's greatest strength would be their ability to grow beyond what they thought possible. The heart of sound. The deeper corridors of the maze pulsed with frequencies that seemed to reach into Elena's very DNA, awakening senses she didn't know she possessed. Each step forward brought new harmonics that painted images directly onto her consciousness, bypassing her eyes and ears to speak to something more fundamental within her human brain. The walls themselves had become transparent, revealing the vast network of crystalline structures that formed the maze's true body, stretching for kilometers in all directions. Commander Thek's scanner array had evolved during their journey, modified by the maze's acoustic fields until it functioned more like a musical instrument than a scientific device. The Zephyrian commander no longer looked at his displays with clinical detachment. Instead, He listened to the data as the scanners translated electromagnetic readings into melodic phrases that told stories about energy flows and quantum fluctuations. "The maze is teaching my equipment to communicate in its own language," Thek said, his voice filled with wonder that his species rarely allowed themselves to express. "My scanners are no longer just measuring reality, they're participating in its creation." Scholar Mirren had undergone the most dramatic transformation. Her translucent form now glowed with bioluminescent patterns that synchronized perfectly with the maze's harmonic cycles. Her ancient Kellian wisdom, stored in neural pathways evolved over centuries of deep ocean meditation, was finally finding its true purpose. She had become a living interface between her team and the maze's consciousness. "I can feel its thoughts," Mirren whispered, her tentacles weaving patterns in the air that left trails of phosphorescent light. "The maze isn't just testing us anymore. It's showing us how reality works at the deepest level. Sound isn't just vibration here, it's the fundamental force that shapes existence itself." Warrior Grax had surprised everyone, including himself. The massive Torvan warrior had discovered that his species' traditional war chants weren't just ceremonial. They were acoustic technologies that could literally reshape matter through focused sonic resonance. His neutronium warhammer had become unnecessary as he learned to forge weapons from crystallized sound itself. "My ancestors knew," Grax said, his rocky features softened by understanding. "The songs we sing before battle aren't just for courage. They're for creation. We've forgotten how to build with our voices because we became obsessed with destroying with our hands." Elena watched her teammates transform as they progressed deeper into the maze, feeling a profound sense of pride mixed with growing apprehension. The maze was revealing the hidden potential within each species, but she could sense that they were approaching something that would challenge even their expanded capabilities. The corridor opened into the largest chamber they had yet encountered, a spherical space so vast that its far walls disappeared into acoustic shadows. At the center hung a structure that defied description, a crystalline formation that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Elena's three-dimensional perception could process. It pulsed with harmonics that carried the weight of eons, songs that had been playing since before her species had learned to speak. This was the heart of sound, the maze's central intelligence and the source of its incredible power. As they approached the structure, Elena felt a presence focus its attention on them with an intensity that made her knees weak. The consciousness that dwelt within the crystalline heart was ancient beyond measure, a collective intelligence formed from countless species that had successfully navigated the maze's trials over millions of years. The heart spoke, not in words but in pure meaning that bypassed language entirely. Elena felt concepts and emotions flow directly into her mind, carrying information about the maze's true purpose and the cosmic significance of their trial. The universe was approaching a critical transition point. New forms of consciousness were emerging throughout the galaxy, species that had the potential to transcend physical limitations and join the community of ascended beings. But the transition was dangerous. Many species destroyed themselves before achieving transcendence. Unable to balance their technological capabilities with wisdom and compassion, the maze served as both filter and teacher, identifying species with the necessary qualities while preparing them for the responsibilities that came with advanced consciousness. The tests weren't designed to eliminate the unworthy. They were designed to awaken the potential that existed within all sentient life. Elena felt the heart's attention turn specifically to her, and she realized why humans had been chosen for this trial. Her species possessed a unique combination of adaptability, empathy, and creative problem-solving that made them ideal candidates for serving as bridges between different forms of consciousness. But first, they had to prove themselves worthy of the knowledge they sought. The heart's harmonics shifted, and Elena felt reality begin to reshape itself around them. The chamber dissolved into pure acoustic energy, leaving them floating in a space composed entirely of crystallized sound. Here, in the maze's deepest sanctum, the laws of physics bent to the will of harmonic resonance. Elena found herself separated from her teammates, each of them facing individual trials that would test the core of their being. She floated alone in a sphere of shifting frequencies, surrounded by challenges that spoke directly to her human nature. The first test came as a cascade of discordant noise, chaotic sounds that represented the conflicts and divisions that plagued the galaxy. Wars between species, ideological battles that had raged for centuries, the constant struggle between order and freedom. Elena felt the cacophony trying to overwhelm her, to convince her that harmony was impossible in a universe filled with such fundamental disagreements. But Elena had grown up human, a species that had learned to find unity in diversity. She began to hum, a simple melody that her grandmother had taught her as a child. The tune was nothing special, just a lullaby about finding peace in troubled times. But as her voice joined the chaos, something miraculous happened. The discordant sounds began to organize themselves around her melody. Each harsh note found its place in a larger harmonic structure, creating beauty from what had seemed like pure noise. Elena realized that the test wasn't about eliminating conflict, it was about finding ways to make conflict productive, to transform disagreement into creative tension that drove growth and evolution. The second test came as silence. Complete, absolute silence that pressed against Elena's consciousness like a physical weight. In the absence of sound, she felt herself beginning to dissolve, her sense of individual identity fading as she merged with the infinite quiet of deep space. This was the test of isolation, the challenge that faced any species attempting to transcend physical limitations. How do you maintain your sense of self when you become part of something infinitely larger? How do you preserve what makes you unique while joining a collective consciousness that spans galaxies? Elena thought about her teammates, about the bonds they had formed during their journey through the maze. She thought about humanity's greatest strength, their ability to maintain individual identity while working together toward common goals. She began to speak, not singing this time, but simply talking about who she was and where she came from. Her words created ripples in the silence, small disturbances that gradually grew into complex patterns. She spoke about her childhood on Earth, about her education and her dreams of exploring the cosmos. She talked about her teammates and their individual struggles to understand the maze's lessons. Each word added another layer to the acoustic pattern she was building, creating a sonic portrait of human consciousness that was both unique and connected to the larger tapestry of galactic civilization. The silence acknowledged her success by filling with the voices of her teammates. Thek's clicking harmonics, modified by his new understanding of acoustic technology. Mirren's flowing melodies, enriched by her connection to the maze's ancient wisdom. Grax's rhythmic chanting, transformed from battle cries into songs of creation. Together, their voices created a harmony that represented the best of what their species could achieve when they worked together. But Elena could sense that one final test remained, a challenge that would determine whether they were truly ready for the knowledge that awaited them. The heart of the maze spoke again, and Elena felt herself transported to a vision of the future. She saw the galaxy as it could become, filled with species that had learned to communicate through harmonic resonance rather than primitive language. Worlds that had been reshaped by acoustic technology, their very matter organized according to musical principles that created perfect harmony between consciousness and environment. But she also saw the dark paths that led to failure. Species that had gained acoustic powers but used them for domination rather than cooperation. Worlds where the abuse of harmonic technology had created permanent dissonance, trapping entire civilizations in cycles of conflict and destruction. The final test was simple in concept but devastating in its implications. Elena had to choose what humanity would become when they gained access to the maze's knowledge. She could guide her species toward transcendence, helping them join the community of ascended beings that watched over the galaxy's development. Or she could take the knowledge and use it to make humanity dominant, to give her species advantages that would allow them to conquer and control other civilizations. The choice carried consequences that would echo through millions of years and affect countless species that had not yet evolved into consciousness. Elena felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders, heavier than any burden she had ever imagined carrying. She thought about the Vorlak raiders who had followed them into the maze, their aggressive instincts overwhelming their ability to appreciate the beauty they had encountered. She thought about her own species' history, filled with wars and conflicts driven by the desire for power and control. Humanity had the potential for great good, but they also carried within them the seeds of their own destruction. The answer came to her not through logic or analysis, but through the simple recognition of what it meant to be human. Her species had always been at their best when they were helping others, when they were building bridges instead of walls. The greatest achievements in human history had come from cooperation and mutual understanding, not from domination and control. Elena began to sing again, but this time her song was different. Instead of creating harmony from chaos or maintaining identity in silence, she sang about connection. about the bonds that linked all conscious beings together, regardless of their species or origin, about the responsibility that came with knowledge and the duty to use power in service of something greater than oneself. Her song reached out beyond the maze, touching the consciousness of every sentient being in the galaxy. For a brief moment, every thinking creature felt what it was like to be human, to carry within themselves the capacity for both creation and destruction, and to choose creation again and again despite the difficulties it entailed. The heart of the maze responded with a harmony so beautiful that Elena felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her individual existence. She became part of the maze's collective intelligence while remaining fundamentally herself, a bridge between human understanding and cosmic awareness. When the vision faded, Elena found herself back in the central chamber with her teammates, but everything had changed. They were no longer the same beings who had entered the maze days earlier. Each of them carried within themselves a piece of the cosmic harmony they had experienced, a connection to the greater community of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. Commander Thek's scanner array had evolved into something that could detect and analyze consciousness itself, measuring the harmonic patterns that defined individual identity across species barriers. Scholar Mirren glowed with bioluminescent wisdom, her ancient knowledge now enhanced by direct connection to the accumulated experience of millions of ascended beings. Warrior Grax had learned to forge reality itself through focused acoustic resonance, his war chants transformed into tools of creation rather than destruction, and Elena carried within herself the responsibility of guiding humanity's integration into the galactic community. She had become a conductor in the cosmic orchestra, helping her species find their unique voice while learning to harmonize with the songs of countless other civilizations. The maze began to sing its final song, a melody that would guide them back to the surface and prepare them for the challenges that awaited them. The knowledge they had gained came with obligations. They would return to their respective species as ambassadors of a new age, teachers who would help their people understand the responsibilities that came with true cosmic citizenship. As they walked back through corridors that now seemed familiar rather than threatening, Elena felt a profound sense of completion mixed with anticipation. They had survived the maze not through strength or technology, but through their willingness to grow beyond their limitations and embrace their connection to something greater than themselves. The crystalline walls sang them toward the surface, carrying harmonies that would echo in their consciousness for the rest of their lives. They had entered the maze as representatives of their individual species. They were leaving as citizens of the galaxy, carrying within themselves the seeds of a future where all conscious beings could join together in perfect harmony. When they finally emerged into Nexara's lavender sky, Elena looked back at the crystal maze one last time. It stood unchanged, patient and eternal, waiting for the next group of beings ready to take their place in the cosmic community. But for Elena and her teammates, everything had changed forever. They had learned that the universe itself was a song, and they had finally discovered how to sing along.